Well. Here we are back again after a long break, and it has been really exciting for us to be waiting to be back on the podcast as SAFT Duo. And today we're going to kick off with yet another argument of the natural theology series, which we have been looking at, and really excited to be back to talk about it and have discussion on a brand new argument. And Jacob, how are you? And why don't you just give a quick recap of what has been happening in the past couple of months when we were not here with the audience?
Yeah, Piyush, it's great to be back with you on SAFT Podcast. The last couple of months, I think some of our viewers would have observed that we were quite radio silent on all platforms and all verticals. We've been taking a couple of months off as a team to come together, to recalibrate, to spend some time in prayer, to rethink, reevaluate. And it's been a great time of both rest in terms of the effort that we put in towards the podcast and also in terms of coming together as a team. And one of the most exciting things that happened to me in February, as this video comes out in March, in February was I got to go to the UK and attend the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference. And it was amazing. Got to meet a lot of our apologetics folks, Justin Brierley, Glenn Scrivener, Ruslan and John McRae, What Do You Mean? And many more folks. Ran into Abdul Murray, Alonso Paul, and again, many other folks. Got to meet Jordan Peterson, Os Guinness, and some of the giants that we look up to in this field as well. So it was an exciting time. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with what the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, the ARC, is all about, consider it to be a Judeo-Christian alternative to the World Economic Forum. And you can check them out on their website. And if you go to SAFT blog, I'll drop it in the description. I've just written my experience at the ARC and what the ARC is all about, and where we Christians could play a role going forward with the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. So that you can find on SAFT blog, and make sure to subscribe to the newsletter from the SAFT blog so that you are in the loop about all upcoming blog releases and articles from our end. It's been a few exciting few months for us.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, whenever Jacob and we have spoken about it, and again today when he mentioned about the ARC, I feel so jealous, listening to the names and to the people who he got to meet. I mean, yeah, wow. But we're glad that, Jacob got this opportunity from SAFT to be there and be a part of the, the ARC event. So let's straight away dive right into why we are here today. As I mentioned at the beginning, that today we are going to start speaking and discussing about the third argument in this series. And today we're going to talk about the fine-tuning argument. So Jacob, I mean, when we hear about this term fine-tuning, can you elaborate why it is called the fine-tuning argument?
Yeah. The argument is quite simple, and it has taken different forms over the years. But quite simply, what we mean by the fine-tuning argument is essentially that the universe in its entirety, so the galaxies, the solar systems, the stars, all of that, the universe in its entirety, and all the way down to the atoms, and as small as you can go, has been finely tuned to make advanced life possible. That's what the argument's crux is. And immediately you get the sense of where this comes from. And I think a lot of our listeners would be familiar with different variations and different formats of this argument. And I'm sure that even if you have not read up on the fine-tuning argument, you would have stumbled across what this implies in a common natural observation of the world. So that's what the argument is all about. It's making a case for a creator based off of the fact that the universe is finely tuned for life. So that then leads us to ask another question that it's good to clear the air. We see the phrase the teleological argument. So the fine-tuning argument, teleological argument. Piyush, are they both the same? Is there some sort of difference between them both?
Basically, you'll see us use these both these terms interchangeably. So basically, the word teleological, it comes from the word telos, which means purpose. So what it means that when we look around us, when we see different things around us, we try to come to a conclusion that everything has a purpose, and the end goal or the purpose for whatever we see around us is the crux of the argument. So that's why, when we discuss about the fine-tuning argument, we'll be able to see that how both of them come hand in hand and we use them interchangeably. So yeah, now as we talk about this,
and it's not just us who use it interchangeably. I've seen this used interchangeably by philosophers on this topic as well, because it sort of goes practically hand in hand. So that's a good point to keep in mind as as our viewers get into the topic.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you might get confused, but we were also there at some point of time. But it's good to keep some of these things clear in mind before we dive into the crux of this topic. So yeah, moving ahead. I mean, the way we follow our in our natural theology series, the way we have been following is that we start off by seeing tracing back in history, like who all have championed in this argument. There are some big names which come to our minds, like Plato, Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, and the most the most famous name which is taken with the fine-tuning argument, which is William Paley. So let's just start off by talking about what Plato had to say about the fine-tuning argument. So, ancient Greek philosophers, what they did, that they were really impressed by the order in which the universe ran, correct? And during those days, I can only imagine how the sky used to be, and how, at night, how the stars were visible very clearly. So, when they used to observe the night sky, it was really clear, and I'm sure that it might have, really increased the curiosity and made them to think a lot about how it has been come to order. So Plato had two things that, which he used to mention. One is the argument on the soul. This is the first argument of Plato. And the second one was that from the order of the motion of the stars, and all of the things under the dominion of the mind which ordered the universe. So from here we can see that Plato employed both of these arguments to refute atheism. And when we listen to the arguments, we come to a conclusion that there must be a best soul, or a starting point, who is the maker and the father of all. So hence, this is what Plato had to say, and we can see that even he had some contribution to the fine-tuning argument. So then next we come to...
The key point is that the words that he used, right, the best soul, the maker and father of all, the king, these are words used by Plato when he is advancing the argument based off of the order around him. And it's interesting to see a Greek philosopher use those words, the father of all, which is why I think when we look at Paul speaking at Areopagus, he and in his writings he refers to this poet, and he says, "For in him we live, move, and have a being, for we are his offspring." This idea of God as the father, or God as, or a primordial being as the source, the progenitor of the universe and humans, was quite etched into Greek philosophical thought as well. So that's great insight from Plato, and I think that's where we go back to the earliest form of the fine-tuning argument.
Yeah. Right. Next, as I mentioned, next we come to Aristotle. So, Jacob, why don't you tell us what he had to say about the argument?
So Aristotle, one instance where we see where Aristotle makes a fine-tuning cases, there is this lost work of his called On Philosophy, and we have a fragment of that work. And in that he makes a point about that the wonder of the cosmos, the wonder of the universe around us, is built in to what drives philosophy. And what he means by that is, well, philosophy asks a lot of questions, right? It asks the question of the meaning of life, the purpose of life, on morality. Socrates and all of these, they asked questions of how should man live so philosophy asks a lot of questions.
Mm-hmm.
And Plato's point, and Aristotle's point was that the probing to ask all of these questions about these deep mysteries of life starts off by this wonder about the universe, this wonder about nature around us. And so we ask by simple questions, looking at the night sky and all of that. And that then probes and moves these philosophers to ask much deeper questions.
Yeah.
So that's, in other words, Aristotle is saying that, if you had to deal with philosophy, if you had to deal with these immensely mystical, deep thought questions of life, whatever that may be, and whatever form that has taken shape in Greek philosophy, it starts off by simply asking the question about how the universe came to be and what makes the universe special and how we are here. That just shows how the fine-tuning argument is quite pervasive in philosophical thought in one way or the other. And Piyush, you would have looked up the night sky at some point, and realized the beauty of the night sky. I realized that first when I was at my mother's ancestral home, and I stood out to the to the courtyard, to the front yard, and I looked up and I could see the night sky without any of the trees hindering it. And that was the first time I took note of the night sky in that way, and I realized, wow, like it's like looking up at a 360-degree dome for the first time, because when you're in the middle of buildings, you don't get to see that perspective.
Yeah.
And you would have probably had that same experience at some point or the other. And that made me wonder, imagine the Greeks at that time looking at the night sky without there being any pollution to the sort that we are seeing, and seeing all of the stars and the planets in motion and having that sense of wonder. Do you have any sort of experience looking at the night sky, just being mesmerized by the stars?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the sad part is when we live in big cities, like currently I'm in Delhi, previously I stayed in Mumbai, Jacob, you stay in Sharjah, UAE. So it's really sad that, you know, because of the pollution, we are really not able to see the sky clearly. But there have been instances, you know, when I have been to hill stations or you know, like last year when we had gone for the Arete Academy in Bali. So during those times, these are places where, you know, the pollution is pretty less, and whenever I looked at the sky, it really mesmerized me. And you know, personally, I really love looking at the sky, be it the clouds or the stars. I am fond of it. So such experiences are really great.
Yeah. And that sense of wonder is what then leads to the final point I want to make regarding Aristotle. So Aristotle draws up this imagination of people who have been, this group of people who have been living underground, seeing the sky for the first time. And if you've seen the recent movie Transformers 1, the animated movie Transformers 1, there is the scene where the boats, Optimus Prime and others, come out of the underground to the surface for the first time. And it's so different to what the underground is. The beautiful sky and the animals around and the whole surface is quite different to the mines underneath. And they have the sense of wonder just looking around and trying to take in all of this. And so Aristotle gives a similar example of that sort, where a group of people who have been underground all the time come up and they see the sky, they see the universe, nature for the first time. And then he goes on to say that when they should behold all these things, most certainly they would have judged both that there exist gods and that all these marvelous works are the handiwork of the gods. Now, certainly Aristotle is writing in a very polytheistic way, that's no doubt. But what's clear, Piyush, there is that he simply says that when you look around the universe, you have to grant the fact that there is a superior intelligence behind it.
Yeah.
And in his work, Metaphysics, Aristotle goes on to argue for the first unmoved mover. So it's interesting. He's not going on a purely polytheistic, X number of gods and dropping it off there. He makes the case in a polytheistic framework, being in Greek mythology and all of that. But then at a later point, we see him making the case for the first unmoved mover as well. So the fine-tuning argument has that implication as well. And Piyush, when we look at this aspect of this argument, the pervasiveness in that the Greeks make sense of it. We're going to look at a couple more names and see how they make sense of it. And also this example from Aristotle, that people who are beholding the night sky, the universe for the first time, will immediately draw to a conclusion of it.
Right.
That just speaks about how this argument is all around us. Do we see something from scripture that speaks to this?
Yeah. So let me just read for all of us from the book of Romans, chapter 1, verse 18 to 20. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. Let me repeat this again. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, so that they are without excuse. Amen. So I think over here also it clearly mentions like how everything has come into like how like we were able to come to like bring all of these together into the fine-tuning argument. So yeah, I think this is what thank you, Jacob, for clearly mentioning what Aristotle had to mention about this. So what about
and just to make one point before we move on to Thomas Aquinas, that verse very clearly points out to the fact that even without specific revelation, which scripture is specific revelation, general revelation that's out there. So we covered the moral argument, the sense of morality that we have in our hearts, right? That is generally out there. Anyone can come to terms and grasp with it. The universe that's around us, that Aristotle and Plato, who did not have access to scriptures, it's out there for anyone to come to terms with. And that's what the Bible is being very clear.
Yeah.
This is made evident and visible to all from those things that are made, so that no one is without excuse. So some of us may be wondering at some point, what about those who have not heard the gospel?
Right.
And that's a very exciting discussion to go into. But at the very least, one thing that we can come to terms with is not just from scripture, as we have read, but as we look at these non-Christian, non-Jewish thinkers who did not have access to scripture, even within their own writings, we see that by just observing nature, they come to the terms that the world cannot be purely atheistic, that there must be something greater out there. So that's Plato and Aristotle. Now, Piyush, another name that you touched upon is Thomas Aquinas.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about the great philosopher Thomas Aquinas and his contribution towards this? But before that, to the audience, we have a simple, easy to read ebook that we've released at SAFT. We have a link in the description. Just go on, head on over there. It's 10 chapters written by young folks like us that will help you to breeze through and understand some of the central points of Christian apologetics. It's free for you to access. Grab hold of it, share around. That's there in the description. All right. Piyush, Thomas Aquinas.
Yeah. So Aquinas, he gave us 5 arguments for God, and the 5th one is the teleological argument. So Thomas Aquinas, what he observed in his study, that everything which is there around us, everything in nature, it all seems to be, working towards a specific goal or a purpose. So if there is something without, even if it is without its own consciousness, we can see that it is working towards a goal. And what happens is that their actions is consistent, and usually it is always, successful. So it suggests that each and everything in nature has a purpose to fulfill. Now, something in nature which lacks its own consciousness, how can it be working towards, fulfilling a purpose? Correct? So what Aquinas, he concludes is that there is something which is operating behind, which has put everything in place, everything with consciousness and without consciousness in place in the universe, that is coming towards fulfilling a goal or a purpose. And this being is a supreme intelligence behind the working or the order of the universe. Right. You want to add anything, Jacob?
And I think one way to capture that is like when we look at an acorn or an apple seed, these are as Piyush mentioned, things without conscience.
Right.
But they always grow towards one end. They grow towards to be that particular tree.
Yeah.
And that's what Akin is saying, right? They are proceeding towards an end goal and quite successfully. So it doesn't seem to be chance at play. So he asks, what makes these unconscious thing to proceed towards an end goal? That's a very I think that's a very astute observation of the nature around us.
Yeah.
That's that. Well, thanks for putting that through.
Yeah. And now we're done with 3 names. Now we come to the 4th one. We'll talk about William Paley.
Yeah.
So as I had mentioned initially, when we talk about the fine-tuning argument, his contributions are massive. So let's just straight off dive into it and talk about what William Paley had to say.
Yes.
And he had this very nice analogy which he used on a stone and a watch. So Jacob, why don't we dive into it?
Yeah. William Paley is, like you said, hands down the most popular name. Like, I can't overemphasize this. Anyone who has not even heard about fine-tuning argument would have heard about either the name William Paley or the argument or this analogy that he puts forward.
Yeah.
So he put forward it for the first time in 1804 in his work Natural Theology, which is also the name of our series. And what he brings up is, and it's quite brilliant. He starts off by drawing up a scenario where you're walking in a field and you come across a stone, a very simple stone. And this is sort of like a monologue where he's asking himself and giving an answer and all of that. So he says, someone asks, where did this stone come from? Like, how did this stone come to be? That's the right way. How did this stone come to be? And the answer is, well, it has always been there. So Paley says, that's a fine answer. You cannot show that answer is absurd. Right? There is no way to say that it's a nonsensical answer or anything. And you're fine to move on to the next. Then Paley says, you walk forward and then you come across a watch. Right?
Yeah.
And Paley asks, well, can we give the same answer as before? Right? Can you say regarding the watch, when someone asks, how did this come to be? He asks, can you say the same thing you said about the stone, which is that it's always been there?
Right. Definitely.
And
no.
Paley then goes on to say, well, yeah, exactly. That's the immediate response, right?
Yeah.
As we would say, well, no, you can't say the same thing about the watch and the stone. So his question is, why can't you not? Like, why can't the same answer fit the stone and the watch? Now, Paley's brilliance is that he first sets a baseline by bringing up the stone. So that in a conversation, like even when you are in a conversation, as you read through this argument, if you're a skeptic or as you engage in a conversation with a friend who is seeking, the fact about what can be used to explain the stone coming to be, or the stone being there, sets a baseline.
Yeah.
Right? How are we going to make sense of this? And then that is used to concede the fact that you can't use that same explanation for the watch. And then the probing question comes, why not? Why is that explanation not sufficient to make sense of the watch? Now, I'm just going to breeze through what that is because we're going to look at the fine-tuning argument in more depth going on. But quite simply, Paley says that answer is unsatisfactory. The same answer for the stone is unsatisfactory for the watch because the watch has several parts. That is something that we know that has been put there to show the purpose of the hour.
Yeah.
And also that the parts, if they were different or had different shape or different size, either they would not have any motion so that the parts don't move at all, the springs don't move, the wheels don't turn, either that won't happen or it won't show the time properly.
Yeah.
It'll be completely messed up. So if anything in those parts change, either it won't move at all, like it will be dead, stand still, it won't work at all, or in any mechanical sense, or it may work in a mechanical sense, but not work in a teleological sense, meaning it works, it moves, but it won't fulfill its purpose.
Right.
So that's the telos thought coming into this argument as well. Like, it's all of them are making sense of the question of what are all of these things moving towards. The purpose behind, the end goal behind all of this is what's driving them to think forward about it.
Yeah.
And then he in his writing he lists out the different parts of the watch. So the springs are made of steel because they're quite elastic in that sense. Then you have the brass wheels because they don't rust. You have the glass covering that enables you to see the hands and make sense of the time. All of this is there. So he says that when you put all of this together, when you do a careful examination, you are led inevitably to the conclusion that there is a watchmaker. And that's how this watchmaker argument came to be. So which is how you will see people say, if there is a watch, there is a watchmaker. If there is a building, there's a builder. And all of these different variants came out. This is the initial part. And I think even though some are given to the impression that this argument has been done with, I would say that to get someone thinking about the fine-tuning argument, this is a great place. Right?
Definitely.
Because the argument is not simply watch, therefore watchmaker. It's how Paley put it. You see a stone and you ask, how did this come to be? You can give an answer. Like, even if you say thousands of years of water cut through a canyon and gave form to the smooth pebble, even if you say that, it's very difficult to give that same answer for a watch. And Paley's argument holds even if we are seeing a watch for the first time. Why? Because a careful examination of that watch gives us to think more seriously about how this came to be. One way to put that into perspective is when we do archaeology, we come across different artifacts, right? These could be animal bones, these could be things made of clay, these could be anything. Even if we don't know what that is at the offset, when we do a careful examination of it, we will come to a point to say, hey, this doesn't look like the product of pure nature. This doesn't seem to be that way. That's how we have done archaeology and come to say, oh, this looks like someone were making an instrument. How? Why do you think the holes in the bones have a purpose? Why can't you just assume that an animal bit into it? That could be a possible explanation at first, but when you do a careful examination of it, you come to unpack more of it, and that has led archaeologists over the years to look at things that they find to say, aha, this is not an animal trampling, this is not wind and nature playing its role, this is the effect of a civilization that was here. A set of intelligent beings, intelligent minds that created this. That same thought process that drives archaeologists to make sense of the past is what can be applied here as well.
Right.
And so that sort of concludes the past, the history of the fine-tuning / theological argument.
I mean, whenever we talk about the watchmaker argument, and it really, makes a lot of sense, and it really amazes me how amazingly Paley has put it, because of how he structured it with the baseline, and then, as you mentioned, I don't want to be redundant, but again, I really can't stop myself to repeat at some points of time. So and not only the watchmaker argument, I mean, when we, in our day-to-day life, when we are having conversations with people around us, anything and everything which we see around us, we are living in a world where there's a lot of convenience, and we use a lot of products. There's a product in our pocket, there's a product on our wrist, there's a product everywhere, right? So it's really easy to take any of these and build conversations and share with people of how we think about the teleological argument. Correct. So with that, we've come to the conclusion, the end of this episode. We've crossed the 20-minute mark, but thank you all for staying on till now, and we want to direct you towards the ebook which Jacob had mentioned, where we have where you'll be seeing about Thomas Aquinas and his arguments. The link is there in the description, and at the end of this episode, you'll see the YouTube suggested video for you. Make sure to go click it and watch it. So with that, we'll leave you over here. It was good to talk to you, Jacob, today, and we're looking forward to the next one to have more deeper conversation and putting in more deep thought into knowing about what the fine-tuning argument is. Till then, stay safe, take care, and see you in the next one.